Hi, I'm Ryan Burns with RBB Management Consulting, a supply chain consultancy. Right now, I happen to be engaged with Manufacturers Edge, the MEP Center here in Colorado, working on a great program called the Supply Chain Operations Optimization Program, or SCOOP for short. So working here with aerospace and semiconductor and just other companies to try and understand how we can make supply chain better for these companies and make them more competitive. So that's a little bit about me. And today I'm excited to say that I have Harry Moser, who has agreed to do an interview. Harry is with the Reshoring Initiative, and he is, I think, one of the most passionate and best voices for American manufacturing right now. And I'm excited that he took some time for me. So, Harry, I'll turn it over to you to tell us a little bit more about yourself.
It's great to work with you, Ryan, and especially with you because you've been a great help to us. You've helped us with the tools that we provide to companies, and I really appreciate that. And,
Happy to
and
do
to,
so.
together we're making it happen. So that's great. The little background on me, I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, which is right across the river from New York City. And the biggest thing in town was Singer Sewing Machine. Their main factory in the world was there. 100 years ago, it was the largest factory in the world, and like 5,000 people, 3 million square feet. And my father worked there, my grandfather worked there, I worked there summers. I went past 20 years ago, and everything's gone. Everything's imported. As far as I can tell, everything Singer sells is imported from lower wage countries. And it's a major impact on the city, the state, the country, my family, and so on. And 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 I throughout my career, when I sold CNC machine tools or foundry equipment, company after company, industry after industry I wanted to sell to went out of business, replaced by lower priced product from lower wage countries offshore. And so I said, somebody better do something about that. And so I decided that I was the guy to do that. Um, I've got 2 engineering degrees from MIT, MBA, University of Chicago. For 25 years, I was the president of what was called Charmy Technologies, and then Agi Charmy, and now GF Machining Solutions. So that's the largest maker of EDM machines and a major maker of high-speed milling machines and all kinds of other kinds of machine tools. So I had a wonderful time, great career. Sold a lot in Colorado. So Colorado, I was out there once or twice a year selling and dealing with customers and such. So it was a great place to be, um, and I'm happy to be here with you.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. So, love to hear about your background and especially talking about the Singer plant. It shows why so much of it is personal. I think that probably drives some of your passion level for what you're doing today. So, you're with the Reshoring Initiative, and that's your organization. I think by the name of it, people probably get a good idea of what your mission is. But tell us a little bit more about what the Reshoring Initiative does and what are your actual goals?
So maybe I should just define it first.
Yeah.
So most people know what offshoring is. So offshoring is to make the product in China, India, Mexico, somewhere and ship it here to be consumed. And reshoring is to reverse that process and once again make the product here. And we actually look at two categories. One is reshoring, which is done by a US company. Think of General Motors, for example, and FDI, foreign direct investment, which is a factory put in here by a foreign company, Toyota, Siemens, someone like that. But in both cases, they're choosing to supply the U.S. market from the U.S. or within the U.S. rather than from somewhere else.
Okay.
And our mission is via those two mechanisms to increase U.S. manufacturing by 40%, about 5 or 6 million manufacturing jobs, which would then balance the goods trade deficit, because last year the goods trade deficit was 1.2 trillion, and it'll take about 6 million employees all the way from the lowest level to the highest level um, to overcome that and turn it around.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about how it's going. What have you been able to do and how are you achieving the mission?
Yeah, so is obviously we're not the only one making it happen, but we're an important part of it. So I'm pulling up a slide. Did that come up?
It did. This is great. Thanks.
Okay. This is a slide that shows the trend in the total of those two um, processes, reshoring by U.S. companies, FDI by foreign companies.
Okay.
And in the year when I founded the Reshoring Initiative, 2010, in that year about 6,000 jobs were announced coming back. The process peaked in 2017 with the Trump tax and regulatory cuts, fell off with the trade war, and then picked up, especially with COVID, and now with other causes like disruptions and geopolitical concerns. And so we've gone in total from 6,000 jobs announced in 2010 to about 340,000 announced in 2022. So about what, 50, 60 times as many.
Yeah.
And in 2023, we think maybe 370, 380,000 jobs to be announced.
That's amazing. And I think I've seen this slide before and I know some of the background, but I just want to clarify for those who aren't familiar with it. This is not people getting their jobs again after COVID. This is literal either jobs coming back that had been offshored or foreign companies making direct investment here. This is not just a bump after COVID that we're seeing.
Yeah, a lot of the politicians brag about how many jobs they brought back since whenever, and they take the bottom of the valley and they
Right.
go
Yeah.
up like this, and they think they're magic man kind of thing. But this is we track actual announcements of new facilities, of people being hired, of actual things happening, and we try not to capture just regular organic growth. Our objective is to capture the cases where the manufacturing will be done here, is now being done here, that previously was done offshore.
Okay, very good. So I think you have another slide that shows some of the background on additional, like what's really driving these trends.
Well, I think an interesting. I got a couple interesting slides. We'll probably slide them up as they come through. Let's see what's happening here. The slides to advance. Okay, here's I think an interesting slide. This shows the sort of the commitment of Wall Street. And back 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, Wall Street, Harvard business graduates, people like that would say, cut back to your core competence. And your core competence is probably R&D, marketing, and finance. And get rid of all those assets, get rid of those factories. They're just a bother. You spend money on those things, and you can have all that done more cheaply in China or India or Mexico, somewhere else. So you reduce your assets dramatically, and you increase your earnings, and therefore your return on assets went up dramatically. And whoever recommended gets a promotion and gets stock options, and everything's good. But now the country is finding out that didn't work, because now we're so dependent on the other countries that we're not self-sufficient. We found during COVID, we couldn't take care of our basic needs. And so what this slide shows is the mention of various topics during earnings calls. And earnings calls are what the companies have every quarter when they announce their financial results. And during many of the most recent quarters, reshoring, which you can see up here, was the fastest growing mention, sometimes even faster than artificial intelligence and things like that. They're obviously hot buzzwords. So it's not the most. It wasn't mentioned the most, but it's been rising the fastest.
Got it.
Right. So I think that's an interesting thing to see. The things that were influencing the trend. So back from say 2010 when we started to about 2020, it was I talk about it as the death of 1,000 cuts. Companies would offshore because the wages were lower, the prices were so much lower, and then they'd gradually learn about freight costs and do regular duties, 2, 3, 4, 5% kind of duties, travel costs to go visit the supplier, the higher inventory carrying costs because you've got 2, 3, 4 times as much inventory. The inability to do just-in-time delivery. You can't just deliver the stuff every day or every hour when you need it if it's coming from 5,000, 10,000 miles away. And then more recently, or let's say over that same time period, risks like emergency air freight. Now, you don't think it's going to happen, but it seems to always happen to some extent. And when it does, it's 10 times or so the expense
Right.
of ocean freight. Very important here, the benefit of having engineering and manufacturing near each other. Companies, when the R&D is here and you have especially a contract manufacturer there, say somewhere in Asia, they can't talk together during the day. They have a different language. They rarely see each other. So it's very hard to optimize both the product design and the process to the benefit of the company and the customer. There's some value to made in USA labeling, especially on consumer products, the risk of stocking out, the cybersecurity risk, quality differentials, et cetera. So all these things were important considerations, for 10 or so years. And now disruptions have become the major driving force. We had the Thai floods 5, 6, 7 years ago, the COVID a couple of years ago, our own LA dock strike, which delayed things from coming in. Very, very ongoing, the Russia-Ukraine war, the Suez Canal blockage, and so all these things have gotten companies to believe that that disruptions, that major, things arriving a week late, a month late isn't too unusual. And when that happens, obviously it messes up the entire plan. And now the big thing is geopolitics. Sort of continuing on from the Russian theme. So I saw a survey someone had done recently, and the number one consideration for companies in redesigning their supply chain is geopolitics, concerns about what might happen. So here's this one well-known fellow who says that you should think about diversifying your supply chain as buying insurance. So do you buy fire insurance for your factory? Sure, I do. Have you taken insurance out on the risk of something happening over Taiwan, and you're cut off for years from China and Taiwan and everything coming from there? Would your company survive? And if the answer is no, then the smart thing is to get as much out of there as you can and get it as much as you can here that makes sense here. Maybe some to Mexico, maybe some to Germany, who knows where, but at least a significant portion of it here, so that if everything goes wrong, you manage to stay in business and continue to supply your customers.
Right. Right. I think a lot of, manufacturers, especially at the small, all the way up to some of the middle markets, company sizes, they just have a very difficult time understanding their supply chains and therefore understanding the risk behind it. So I do think it's more important than ever that people truly do know their supply chains so that they can understand the risk and start to mitigate it.
Let me add this one. This is something we just came out with about a month ago, and so the people say, yeah, okay, there's risk, but how do I quantify that? How do I estimate the impact on my company if things go wrong? And so this map starts with the U.S. as the lowest risk place to source the geopolitical risk, and we say that we said the probability is 0.05% in the U.S. And then we said Russia, it's 100%, because right now you're not getting anything out of Russia, and China, 3.5%. So definition, the probability that you will be cut off completely from that country, from all supply from that country, probability per year. So we're saying 3.5%, like 1 chance in 30, something like that would happen in China. And then much smaller percentages, like in Germany, it's like 0.1%, or 0.2%. So yeah, so a very, very reasonable thing. But some other countries have significant problems. The Middle East, for example, Africa, some portions of South America, and so on. And so the idea here is that the company should say, what's the probability of being cut off from that country? And if that happens, how long will it take me to find another source? How much business will I lose during that time period? What's the margin on that business that I'll lose? Calculate an expected value of loss, and then compare that to how much more you'd have to pay to source the product, the components in the United States, and then balance those two off. And our statistics would show that at least 20, 30, 40% of what companies are importing, their expected value would be dramatically higher by bringing the work back.
Very interesting.
So this map's on our website. anybody that wants to use it, we encourage them to use it.
Very good.
Let's see what else. Another thing that's been happening over the last time period, especially relative to China, and I'll focus on China because China is 20-25% of our imports. They're like a third of our trade deficit. They're the most risky, the by far the biggest geopolitical risk. So I'll focus on them, but
Right.
we have deficits with most countries,
Yeah.
and this shows that the unit labor cost, so the cost in dollars of the labor to produce a product in China, that's the blue line, in the last 20 years or so have gone up 400% roughly, 350, 400%. Whereas all the other countries, China or Mexico, Germany, US, and so on, have stayed roughly flat, varying mainly with currency rates. But China has gone up dramatically because their wage rates, because their business has been so good, our business, that they took, has been so good that the demand for labor has exceeded the supply of labor, and the wages have gone up 10 or 15% a year for those 15, 20 years. And so where it was almost not worth counting the wage costs to produce something 20 years ago, now it's significant. Like now a typical factory wage is about $7 an hour. In comparison to US, maybe 20, 22, something like that, probably out in Colorado. And so it's getting high enough that even before COVID, even before Taiwan issues, companies were pulling work out because it was no longer cost competitive. And sometimes they went to Vietnam, Cambodia, whatever, but often they came here. And my job is to get them more often to come here.
Right.
So got some more questions?
Yeah. So let's see. I don't know, do you have more slides to share?
Oh, I got more to share. You want me to go through them or you want to ask me questions?
Well, let's see what your next slide is, because I'll try and tailor my question to around your slide.
Okay. So when companies are trying to make that decision of what to bring back, now they look at the FOB price or the Ex Works price, the factory cost, more or less. And that's the blue line here. And the horizontal axis is China percentage of the US. So at 100%, the price from China and the US is equal. To the left, the China price is lower. To the right, the US price is lower. And you can see that the blue curve, which is price, peaks at about 70%. So on average, the manufacturing cost in China is about 70% of the cost in the US. And that's a lot. And that's why companies went there. We did a survey with an accounting firm, big accounting firm called Plant Moran, asked manufacturers and distributors, why do you import? Why don't you just do it here or buy it here? And they said price. Overwhelmingly, they said price. We all know that. And this chart shows how big that gap is. And one of our objectives is to get companies to stop buying on the basis of price, but instead look at total cost, where total cost would start with price and add in duty and freight and carrying cost of inventory, all those things that I mentioned in the other curve, in the other slide. And when they do that, the curve shifts to the right so that now the peak of the distribution is around 85%. And if there happens to be a Section 301 or Trump tariff, which is imposed on the majority of Chinese imports, then it shifts to the yellow curve, where the peak is now over 100%. So the key thing to look at is, based on price, the US wins 8% of the time. In other words, the percentage of the area under the curve that's to the right of the 100, based on TCO 32%, based on if the TCO with a tariff 46%, and since most of the tariffs are actually 25%, that would go up to 50 or 55%. So by companies doing the math correctly, they will see that it makes sense to bring the work back. And if you include things like geopolitical risk, which isn't in here, if you include ESG, environmental, social, and governance, then it would shift even further to the right. You can make, for example, we've done studies of 9 different products: paper, aluminum die casting, steel, etc. And typically, the environmental impact of making it in China and shipping it here is 25 to 50% higher than making it here. So if a company believes in ESG, if they're really trying to do something for the environment, the single simplest thing they can do is make it here or buy it here instead of there. And it's much easier to track, you know what's happening, and then you also pick up the social value of bringing jobs back to the US.
So I know there are a lot of other factors that really affect and drive this trade deficit. What are some of the others, like other than the fact that we're buying more than we're exporting, right? That's the obvious one, but what is really driving it from the
What
US
drove
perspective? The
the
trade
big trade
deficit.
deficit?
Yeah,
Trade
what are the
deficit.
other factors? Yeah.
Yeah. So initially it was the wage rate, okay? Because the companies could save so much money, and once one competitor did it, the others followed because the competitor's going to cut the user price, and they'd have to or go do it or fail. And I can't blame them for doing that. I can blame them for not doing the math. So the things that drove it: U.S. costs being too high, manufacturing cost price, um, U.S. labor being insufficient. Didn't have done it for years. We've had shortages of workforce, especially skilled workforce. U.S. workforce not being as well trained as the best. So if you compare the U.S. to Germany, Switzerland, Austria, countries like that have these incredibly good apprentice programs and start really smart high school kids who here would obviously have gone to university. There, many of them go into the apprentice program, eventually perhaps go to university, and become the managers, owners of these small to medium-sized companies, the kind of companies that MEPs work with, and so they have a smarter, better trained workforce who consider themselves to be just as professional as the university graduate and are paid as well as the average university graduate.
Right.
And so workforce, very important issue. As things happened, as the uh, as the U.S. lost industry to offshore, pretty soon or certain product categories cannot be found here. So you can't get certain processes done here. You can't get certain products made here. I was just at FabTech, the big forming and welding
Right.
show, and almost all the equipment that's sold there was made in Europe, or especially Europe, but also Asia to some extent. Very, very little of it's made here. Some is Lincoln Electric, a few others are still great suppliers, but the U.S. is incredibly dependent not only for the user kind of products that we have here, but also by the equipment to make the user products if we want to expand and increase. So we've hollowed out our economy. Now, because of the hollowing out, because of the factories declining in the neighborhood, the company down, the factory goes out of business, and then the student, the guidance counselor looks at that and says, Johnny, I don't think you should go into manufacturing. That's a horrible career. Look what happened to your uncle. Look what happened to all those other people down at the mill. Why don't you become a postal worker or a doctor, or go to university and figure it out over the next 5 years or so. And so now one of the things that I'm confident is happening is because of the visibility of reshoring, because it's clear to companies and to workers and employees and parents that manufacturing is coming back. It's clear once again that manufacturing is once again a great career with opportunities starting at a decent wage and then moving up with training, eventually maybe getting an engineering degree, what have you.
Right.
That once again, that's a great career, and it's going to be easier to attract and train the best, which is what we need to compete, because the other countries are sending a lot of their best into manufacturing.
Very good. Yeah, no, I think that especially on the apprenticeship programs that we are practically non-existent here. We have, I know with the manufacturers that I work with, skilled labor is one of the most difficult things for them to source because we're not creating skilled labor, right? Because of those same things you're talking about. So I hope that this will drive some change there.
You
So,
know, for example, in Germany and Switzerland, 50 or 60% of the high school kids at the age of 16 or 17 go into an apprenticeship. Now,
wow.
they still take courses, they still study theory, they still study math and English or history or whatever, but they're actually in a company at least 3 days, eventually 5 days a week, you know, doing the real work. And that's, and in contrast to that 50 or 60%, in the US, about 5% go into apprenticeships. And of those, most of them are in construction, because the unions organize these apprenticeships in the construction field because they want to control that.
Mhm.
And as a result, we just don't have enough people coming into the industry, and especially not coming in and being well trained. You tend to have people that sort of come in and they sort of follow somebody around and they pick up a little skill, they start sweeping the floor, and then maybe they run the saw, you know, and then they work somehow absorb something. Whereas and I've taken tours over to Switzerland to see the apprentice programs, and they get these really smart kids, really well trained, and as a result, they can like I went to one of the big Swiss machine tool makers, and one of their managers said, when we're developing a complicated process to make a complicated part for the US, we'll break it down into 2 or 3 steps, because on average, the US programmer and operator can't handle the more complicated, let's say 5-axis programming or 7-axis programming or whatever it is. Whereas for Switzerland or Germany, we do it the right way, one setup, make the whole thing at one pass. Better quality, better, lower cost, everything's better. But so if we want to compete, we need to have really smart kids, really well trained.
Thanks for that. So we know a lot of the reasons why it's happening. We can see here the impacts that it's having, and we see some of the good news where you're showing how many jobs are coming back. What are you doing at the Reshoring Initiative to help companies here in the U.S. capitalize on these opportunities?
The TCO estimator is our original offering to help them make the right decision.
And just to clarify for people who might not know all the lingo, TCO is total cost of ownership. So not just looking at a $5 versus $3.50 price, but looking at what it really takes to get it to your facility and all the risk and other costs associated with it.
Yeah, and not just the cost of getting the current shipment here, but the probability you'll be able to get a shipment a year from now if you continue to have your tooling over there to make the part and all this kind of thing. Huh? So we provide this. We also, I'm going to drop down a couple of slides. Here's another service we provide. This is the import substitution program. And under the import substitution program, a company can identify a product, or something, a widget, a flange, a pump, a motor, a fan, or something that they're really good at making, in national class at least, and we can identify for them who the biggest importers are of that kind of product, what tonnage of product those importers or each importer is bringing in, whom they're buying them from offshore, some idea of what they're paying for it. And then we train our company, Colorado company, for example, to use the total cost of ownership estimator to do the calculation, take that to these importers and say, hey, I see you're bringing in 50 tons a year, 100 tons a year of these things, and we're really good at making those. We just put in a new machine that's as good as anybody in the world has. And we've done the calculation. When you consider all the relevant costs and risks, we believe you're going to be 10% better off buying them from us. Or the machine tool salesman, for example, could go to that importer and say, I've got this great machine. Why don't you put it in and make the products yourself instead of importing them? Or I can find some good contract manufacturers here in Colorado that would be delighted to put in the machine and make them for you. So let's get together and work out something that's good for the importer. It's good for the local supplier. It's good for me selling you a machine tool. It's good for Colorado and the country. There's money we're leaving on the table. Let's all pick it up together.
Yeah, no, I
Is it?
think that's great. And obviously, I would enjoy getting to work with you on the update to the total cost of ownership model. I had a lot of fun with that. But this is one perspective that I really appreciate because, a lot of my background comes from procurement. So when I think about total cost of ownership, I think, first and foremost of what I'm buying, right? I think that this is amazing that people can really use it as a commercial tool to go after their customer base. And with the information you're talking about here, you already know that these people are buying what you sell, right? So they buy it, they're buying it offshore, and you can do the math to see if you're going to be competitive for it. So I just think that's a great use for
Yeah.
the companies.
So that's a way to sort of find leads, and the TCO estimator is a sales tool to to close the deal. Just as a general rule, if I were a company selling product, selling anything to other companies, when once a year you go in and you say, hey, do you need any more widgets next year? Do you need anything that I'm selling? And
Right.
and most of the time the customer says, I'm okay, I'll call you if I have a problem, kind of thing. And today my response would be, are you getting much from China? Yeah. What would happen if something happened over Taiwan and everything from China got cut off completely for 6 months, a year, 2 years? Would you still be in business? If it would have a major impact on your company, well, what do you think you'd do if that happened? Oh, you'd call the local machine shops and see if they can make something for you. And if something went wrong yesterday over there, those local machine shops are going to get 500 calls today from all the companies that need stuff. And they're going to tell you, I can probably do it for you in a year or 5 years or sometime when I buy more machines and hire more people. So why don't you, so if you, the big company, the importer, if you're insuring your factory for fire, why don't you insure your company for geopolitical risk and use the TCO estimator to pick the 20, 30, 40% that you can get back without impacting profitability and price, and get that back here now. So now you've got the relationships here. So if anything does go wrong, you've got someone who will listen to you and put you at the front of the list when things go wrong.
Can you share with us some success stories? I know you've got a lot that you showed this slide. We've got this many hundreds of thousands of jobs that have come back. Show us a
Okay,
little bit
let
about.
me do one thing first here.
Okay.
This is a slide that a lady from Resolink, she's the CEO, came up with. I think it's just brilliant. And it says companies have gone from the left to the right. So they've gone from worrying about saving pennies on the components that they're buying to wanting to be sure they have the components so they can make their product, whatever it is, the assembly, and sell that and make thousands of dollars of margin and keep their customers. So they've gone from worrying about pennies to protecting thousands of dollars. And so this logic, the OEMs out there that hear this, they should be thinking that, and the salesmen, the salespeople who are selling their products and services should be getting them to keep thinking about the objective, which is selling having the product, being able to make the product and sell the product. Okay, so just wanted to get people to think about that. So here's a couple of companies that we have in our database. We have about 7,000 cases of reshoring and FDI in our database. About 83 of them were in Colorado. I looked it up this morning, and I pulled a few of them out. This is a German aerospace related company that came to Montrose. There's a plastics company that brought back, I think they were already here, but they benefited from reshoring. So I assume their customer gave them the business instead of keeping it, offshore somewhere. And the same kind of things we talked about, the benefits of having R&D close, of being lean, reshoring very supportive of lean, the whole benefit. Here's another company that makes some sunglasses, got a 3D printer. They're buying more 3D printers, bringing work back. And OtterBox makes the containers like
Right.
that you put around your iPhone.
Yeah.
And I've worked with them, actually helping them find mold makers to make their product to replace the Chinese sources of mold. and they had brought substantial work to Colorado. Why? Total cost, time to market, automation. Automation is obviously a very key element in this because our wage rates are higher and we don't have enough people. So between overcoming the cost difference and the lack of workforce, people, automation is a very important method. And I think that's, oh, I had one more, Vestas, big wind turbine component manufacturer. So foreign direct investment in into a combination of places and have brought substantial numbers of jobs. Now, in this case, responsive to the wind production tax credit, just like a lot of companies are responding to the chips and the EV batteries and all these. The government, when the government throws hundreds of billions of dollars at something, generally somebody gets hired.
That sounds good. No, that's great to see that. And I hope that if we talk again in 6 months or a year, you've got more than 83 companies on your win list from Colorado. But
I'd like to see more. We're here to help. If anybody out here who hears this, um, Ryan, you might find some way to put it in it. www.reshorenow.org. And I'm Harry.Moser, M-O-S-E-R, at reshorenow.org. So either if you want to tell me about a case of your reshoring, I'd love to hear about it because the only way we know there were 343,000 last year is to find out about them. Okay.
right.
And if you do tell me about them, you get a free manufacturing is cool t-shirt. Okay. If you can see that,
I like that.
Yeah, which is made in the U.S. out of U.S. cotton, of course. Okay.
Yeah.
And so if you tell us about anybody who tells us about a case that we didn't know about before, then they get the T-shirt.
I like that. And I love that you're making manufacturing cool. Tell us a little bit more about what you think the government can do, right? We talked about how companies can be more thoughtful, look at total cost of ownership, really put the work in there. What can the government do that is kind of on the higher level to make it more
Yeah.
competitive here?
Well, let me first comment a little bit about what they are doing. So Biden has Bidenomics. The chips and the EV batteries, et cetera. And we had fallen so far behind in these things that I think what he did, he had to do. I think he overdid it in some cases. The tax credits on the EVs, the $7,500 is much more than was needed to get the result. He overpaid, so to speak. But I think he needed to do something. But my concern is that he's focused on niches. Now, they're important niches, but you can't, niches don't work. If you have certain industries that are, and you subsidize them, it doesn't work because you don't have the customers for those industries and you don't have the suppliers to the industries. And so, for example, with the chips, we're going to put in, I don't know, 10 or 15 semiconductor plants, and every other country in the world is doing the same thing. And there's clearly going to be an excess supply of chips. And it's agreed that the US factory cost is 20 or 30% higher than most places, and our operating cost is 20% higher than most places. So we're going to have excess capacity to make overpriced chips. And at the same time, almost all of the electronic assemblies that we purchase, infotainment systems for cars, cell phones, computers, servers, electronic medical devices, almost all those are made overseas, especially in China. And so we're going to expect China to buy our overpriced chips to produce the electronic devices to sell back to us when we're maybe fighting with them over Taiwan. So it's not going to happen. So we've advocated to the government. I testified at a Senate commission. I said, I support you supporting the chips, but if you can do that, you've got to get us to start making more of the electronic assemblies so that we'll have a market for the chips. Otherwise, those chip foundries, some of them are going to go bankrupt because they won't have enough business. And so how do you do that? Well, you can't subsidize every industry, because if you subsidize every industry, you got nobody to get the money from to give to the ones you're subsidizing. So we say the key thing is first to have a skilled workforce like Germany, and have many 20, 30, 40% of our kids in high school going into apprentice program, and then eventually an associate's degree, and then let's say an engineering or business degree. And so skilled workforce. Second would be the dollar. Almost all economists agree the dollar is 20-30% overvalued because we're the reserve currency. We have because we're the place that people can store their currency. They shift trillions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars into the United States for storage, and that buys. They're having to buy dollars. When they do that, forces the dollar up, which makes this a good place to be a bank, but not such a good place to have a factory. And so there are methodologies that have been identified, something called the market access charge, that you could apply and would get that 10, 20, 30% premium out of the dollar. Then all of a sudden, if this is the price difference between here and there, you can get that down to here. And now when you do TCO, and now when you automate, now when you apply better skilled labor, now all of a sudden it's much easier to do this than when you've got this kind of a gap like that. So we're convinced that's the right thing to do. There's the hesitancy on the part of the government to do it because there'll be some price inflation. Things won't be as cheap from offshore, and we've estimated that in total you'd have a one-time 2 or 3% price increase. And I say if that's the cost to have to be self-sufficient, to have 6 million more manufacturing jobs here in the United States, well, that's cheap. And if I were the president, I'd take the risk on the inflation and go ahead and do it.
You're not throwing your hat into the ring, are you?
No. Not yet. My hat's too old.
So, one thing that I think a lot of people have is, what does this mean for real estate, right? I mean, because it's, I think there are probably some people that'll be listening to this and they're thinking, all of this sounds great, but how do we make it happen logistically? Like, yes, we can train people. That'll take a while, but we'll have the trained workforce. But from a footprint perspective, what do you see the impacts?
Well, the impact has been clear at the present time. The rate of spending on industrial factories, the rate of spending on industrial, meaning manufacturing construction, has doubled, and at historically high rates from the past. And it's significantly due to the EV batteries and the chips and all these things that the government's throwing hundreds of billions of dollars at. And so that's boomed. And I've made presentations to the brokers, the people who buy and sell these factories, build them on speculation, build them for people and so on. And I've told them that what they've had over the last 10 years has been a boom in distribution centers, a boom in inventory storage, because there's so much imported product coming in, comes off the boat, goes to a distribution center, maybe goes to other distribution centers, goes to Walmart or somebody, gets to the store, and instead in the future there's going to be less of that coming in. There's going to be more factories, bigger factories, more warehousing at the factory after the product's completed, fewer distribution centers, more shipment from the factory direct to, say, Walmart or wherever. And so one thing we've recommended is, if you're building a big warehouse, a big distribution center for supporting other people, that you should design it so it can be converted into a factory, so that when the demand for distribution centers and warehouse space goes down and the demand for factories keeps growing, then, and I'm talking 40% growth in manufacturing, that's huge, leave enough space around the transformers that you can triple the transformer capacity, because factories take more electricity.
Yeah.
Make sure you've got enough land so you can have more parking, because there's more employees in a factory than there are in a distribution center. So to make those choices, and generally speaking, these people are receptive to that idea, and some people have actually done it. So I think but finally, we still have a lot of land, and there's it takes even for the biggest factories, it takes 2 years or 3 years to build them.
Right.
And you can get all the equipment you want generally in a year or two. to fill the factory. It's the people. To get 6 million more manufacturing workers, we need a total societal change. We need to shift from um, high school to college for everyone to high school to a career for everyone, a well-paying, stable, enjoyable career, and which will include many more apprenticeships. So some universities are going to shrink, or they're going to have to convert into apprentice training programs or something. They're going to have to respond to the needs of the country.
Right. Very good. So, as we're in 2023, moving into 2024, we're kind of, getting to the end. What do you expect for the near-term future, especially around which industries are you seeing most of the activity in right now?
Still, it's the ones that where the government's the ones that are easy to find are these big, 1,000-person factories, $2 billion investment, get all the headlines. So the chips and the EV batteries, the solar, the rare earth minerals. Somebody just found the world's biggest lithium deposit in a volcano somewhere in the country. I can't remember where.
Okay.
And someone's going to build a lithium extraction factory and make lithium to make the batteries. So pharmaceutical. It turned out we learned during COVID that something like 90% of our pharmaceuticals either are produced offshore, or if they're produced here, they use the active ingredients that come over from offshore that are necessary to make the end pill of some kind. And so huge investments in all of these industries, but it's broader than that. I like when I went to one of these real estate brokers, like industrial broker conferences, and if I'd gone there 10 years ago, I'd have said reshoring, and they say, which shore, the Atlantic or the Pacific? And I say, no, bring work back. Oh, hey, we're doing that all the time. I've got 3 deals going right now, and I did 2 last year. And so it's clear to me that across a broad range of industries, there's lots of action, and it will continue as long as geopolitics stays like it is. But there's a limit on it because because of people, the shortage of skilled workers. So if I were Colorado, if I were Denver, I have as about the top priority for my city, my state, would be expanding the apprenticeship programs, more technical training in the high schools and at the community colleges, because the number one site selection factor, the number one criterion for companies as to where they're going to put their factories is the availability of workforce, especially skilled workforce. And so if to the extent that Colorado has the best and the most available skilled workforce, Colorado will get the factories.
That's good to hear. Because I think Colorado has a very highly educated population, which I think is helpful, especially on the technical side, because as you mentioned, the manufacturing is not it. We're talking about skilled labor, but it's skilled labor with a technology aspect today to be able to run the more complex machines. So, and I do think with the right training, they're just extremely valuable jobs from a compensation standpoint. It's something that you can build a life around, build a community around, but also too, I think they're rewarding, right? Ton of respect for people who work jobs that are not fun, and I'm glad they do it for the rest of us. But it's going and walking around a warehouse all day, not the same as actually knowing that you're building something and making
No,
something
making something, being
wonderful
able to look at the
manufacturing.
product when it's done, and knowing it's real, and the pay used to be, the pay was significantly better in manufacturing than in services,
Mhm.
and and they've been compressed, and part of the problem is that like if you're working at McDonald's, and you can go to work at Starbucks or somewhere. So Starbucks and McDonald's raise their wages, and it's okay. They raise the price of a burger and a coffee. It doesn't matter except to the consumer. But if the factory raises the wages too much to attract them back, then they can't compete with China and India and Mexico. So one of the advantages of this, of bringing the dollar down, is that the people can get a higher dollar wage and still be more cost competitive relative to those other countries. So otherwise you're not going to be able to attract the quality and quantity of people into manufacturing that you need to succeed.
So, I mentioned that this program that I'm working with Manufacturers Edge on is the initial target is the aerospace industry. That's a really vibrant one and growing here in Colorado, and semiconductors. We've talked a lot about semiconductors. So I think you've hit that a lot. On the aerospace side, tell me how you think reshoring affects them, because for the most part, that manufacturing has not been outshored. That's one that's pretty much stayed here. But are there headwinds or tailwinds that you think that folks that are either in that market or want to be in that market are going to see as this 40% manufacturing comes back? What's the benefits for them?
I'd say the benefit is that as let's say aerospace is typically aerospace components, aerospace end products are high value added per hour of work because there's a brand, there's a technology, you're making to something to a very high standard, lots of specs. And so having more manufacturing in general around you, having more tool and die makers, more welders, more precision machinists, etc., having more of that general infrastructure in the community creates a skill base from which the aerospace manufacturers can attract their people who typically I think are going to be higher paid and make work to a higher standard, perhaps, and certainly more complicated paperwork and such for the aerospace industry. And like there's two professors at Harvard Business School, Pisano and Shi, and they talk about the community knowledge base, and that as you have more manufacturing and it works together with engineering, you develop that competence that is generally available either within the company or for some other company to hire away. And so I think generally a stronger manufacturing is good. You'll have more more people. The local support at the community college will be better because there's a big enough demand for that kind of labor so that they can justify having the training programs.
Right.
So I think that total infrastructure is probably the best value.
Thanks for that, Harry. As we're getting closer to the end. I know your time's valuable. I want to be respectful of that. But as we're coming close to the end of our conversation, we've talked about a lot of different things. My world that I work in is primarily small to mid-sized, middle market manufacturers. With respect to reshoring and how they can grow their revenue by either that or other means, what are the few things that you think they really need to get right in the near term if they're looking to do that? What's your advice for them?
Hopefully I mentioned most of them, but I'll summarize them. Use TCO for buying smarter here versus there. Use it for selling smarter, convincing your customers to buy smarter, to buy here instead of there. Okay. Automation. There's skilled workforces. For skilled workforce, have your own apprentice program, etc. Like I just announced the 6th annual National Metalworking Reshoring Award Monday at FabTech, the big stamping and metal forming show.
Okay.
And the company that won, Hobson and Moser, is I think a 300 plus employee company, and they won it because they had been able to make a complicated part for an electronic for a medical device company, and took the work away from an offshore company that couldn't meet the quality standard. And so there's great opportunities there for this to happen.
Okay. I guess
so again, TCO, skilled workforce, automation. If you don't automate, your costs are going to be too high, and you won't be able to get enough people. And if you don't, and having modern equipment makes your factory a much more desirable place, and you can hire the smart kids that you need to work there. One of the advantages the Chinese have had is that they went from dirt floors and like nothing to have essentially all new factories in the last 20 years. But as you look around at our factories, especially in the Midwest, many of them are 30, 40, 50, 70 years old, and
Right.
some of the equipment's 10, 20, 30, 40 years old. So we've, and why is that? Because we've been operating at, say, a 72 or 75% capacity utilization, at which point companies don't invest very much. Whereas the Chinese have been growing like this, and therefore they're always at 80 or 85% capacity utilization. So as we reshore and our capacity utilization goes up above 80, our companies can afford to expand, buy new equipment, and they have the need to do so because the demand is so high for their product. So as the work flows back here, the work that paid for China expanding will now pay for us to expand.
Very good. Harry, anything that you want to share that we didn't go through today or didn't ask a question on?
I think we did a good job. Again, I think I very much appreciate
Yeah,
your supportive actions with us, and I think the list we just did was, I guess, anybody again who has reshored, get to me and tell me about it. Anybody that needs help reshoring, either of their own decision or convincing their customer you need help, come to me, and I'd be happy to help.
very good. And so I know you mentioned it earlier, but just one more time, can you tell us where we can find Reshore online, where we can find you? Just one more time for good contact info.
Sure. So the website, www.reshorenow.org, and my email address, harry.moser, Moser, @reshorenow.org. And I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, Harry, thanks again for your time today. Go ahead and get the t-shirts ready. I think we're going to need a lot of them here in Colorado.
I look forward to that.
All right.
Thank you,
Have a
Brian.
wonderful day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Bye-bye.